The Labour Party has decided to sell off Royal Mail to a foreign company. The sale of Royal Mail's parent company to the Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky has been approved by the UK government after review under national security laws. The 3.6 billion takeover of International Distribution Services IDS, the owner of the 508-year-old Royal Mail by Kretinsky's EP Group, was confirmed on Monday morning. It will be the first time Royal Mail has been controlled by an overseas owner in its history, which can be traced as far back as 1516 under Henry VIII. The government will retain a golden share in IDS, which means any changes to Royal Mail's ownership, tax residency, or headquarters will need its assent. The Royal Mail brand will be protected for as long as EP owns the company. Now, here are the stipulations the new company has to follow. EP Group agreed to a series of undertakings to persuade the government to let the deal through. They include retaining the universal service obligation for a first-class postal service to anywhere in the country for a fixed price 6 days a week, while Kretinsky is in control, a stronger commitment than the previous 5-year pledge. The government has also blocked Royal Mail from making dividend or similar payments to its owners unless the company meets financial targets and has improved its postal delivery performance. Dividends and asset sales will also be blocked if they put the universal service at risk. For second-class postage, well, it's bad news. IDS has suggested second-class post could be reduced to every other weekday. Now, Royal Mail was privatised in 2013. Labour in 2017 and 2019 promised to bring it back into public ownership, which of course has been ditched by Keir Starmer. Kevin, this isn't really selling off Royal Mail as that's already happened. And the UK will have a golden stake in the company. But in terms of optics, I mean, people will see the headlines. Starmer sells British institution to a foreign buyer. This is not a good look, is it?
No, this is a really bad luck on top of what has already been an awful start for the government, the new supposedly Labour government, of course. The postal service has been another privatisation disaster story. Ever since, like you say, it was privatised in 2013, which again needs to be borne in mind, it was sold off on the cheap by Vince Cable, one of the Lib Dem enablers of that particular Tory shitfest. Yeah, they're costing the UK taxpayer billions of pounds. Indeed, so many billions of pounds that it would probably cover the cost of renationalising it now, bizarrely enough. Yeah, for about 3.6 billion, or as I like to think of it, just over a year of the perpetual money we're now going to be giving to Ukraine, apparently, indefinitely. For how long? Who knows? We could have just brought this back into public ownership, which is what a super majority, including a literal majority of Conservative voters, wanted. Just goes to show you that the Westminster elite don't work on behalf of the British people, clearly. Um, the current ownership group of the postal service, or the Royal Mail, I should say, has been fighting tooth and nail to reduce wages and conditions for postal workers, including fighting the unions and all the rest of it, in order to try and beef up the sale value of this by decreasing the overall cost of it, which unfortunately has and always will be the case with these privatizations, has led to a massive degradation in the overall quality of the service and with people's support for that service, which is the whole point, is that you degrade it to the point where you can just sell it off. And this, for me, is such an encapsulation of the problems within British politics. That Westminster doesn't serve the British people, and that even when you have right wing reaction to the problem, they're focused on the fact that the guy is Czech rather than the fact that he is a billionaire and therefore has divergent needs and material wants than the British people do. This is another British institution, a core part of the British national fabric, which has been sold off and will be dissected like the cadaver of an animal in an abattoir. That's all we are now, is just something to be picked over by rich people so they can make huge amounts of money, regardless of what kind of negative impact it has long term on Britain as a nation.
And I mean, obviously, we can talk about the mechanics of privatization on this, but the reason why I led with optics is because this isn't selling it off, it's already sold off. But if you think about Reform for a second, I mean, Reform have come out and said they'd nationalise water. Whether they would do that or not, don't know. But they're clearly trying to pitch themselves, at least on the economy, to the left, or they're at least buying into the message that, take back control of course, the right typically use it as a dog whistle. But I think the left wing message of take back control of our public services is a good one. And Reform are happy to play into that. And what Labour are doing is they haven't sold it to a British company, they've sold it to a foreign company. And I just think, why do this when clearly the politics is about message, isn't it? And there's already a characterization from the right wing media that Labour doesn't have the interests of the British people at heart. To then go and sell it off to a foreign company, to me, strikes me as so out of touch.
It really does, yeah. It's the mood music of it. It's the story that you sell to the people. It's the counter narrative to the right wing media that you're trying to put out there. And following on from the fake nonsense of the Chagos Islands being given away and all this sort of stuff, the idea of giving away the national gem of the Royal Mail, which, like you say, is a 500-year-old company, one of the most successful and long-lasting mail services on earth. It's enormously well supported. I think only beaten by the NHS and the firefighters, I believe, as supported national institutions. And so, why you would give that, sell that to a private company from abroad when you could just bring it in house? 3.6 billion is nothing. That is a drop in the bucket of the overall spend for the national government. Like I say, and again, not to say that we shouldn't give money to try and help Ukraine in its hour of need, but we are giving perpetually now £3 billion a year under Keir Starmer to Ukraine for war. Why can we find money for war, but we can't find money for postal service or heating pensioners' houses, or not starving third children, etc.? It just sort of plays into the narrative that A, they don't have Britain's interest at heart, and B, that they don't serve the British people. And as to the point of Nigel Farage sort of tacking to the left economically, that's partly because that ground has been totally ceded by all of the national parties. The Conservatives obviously aren't going to represent that because they're a Conservative party. But the Labour Party are supposed to some extent. The Liberal Democrats are sort of supposed to in some respects, in terms of the kind of their one nation economic nationalist type thing that they've tried to do over the years. And yet all of the parties have completely moved away from that. So basically, anywhere from the centre to absolute out there Maoism or something is completely empty in terms of mass support parties, and so that's the place where you're going to pick up votes. It allows Nigel Farage to pretend that he cares about the British people when clearly he doesn't. Whether he'd ever actually nationalise any of these industries, I'm very doubtful. He was a banker after all, an asset manager, I believe. Which means he was exactly the kind of person that this Czech billionaire is. He carves up national institutions and sells them off. That's exactly his raison d'etre, frankly. But regardless of that, whether he'd actually do it or not is neither here nor there. But it allows him to position himself to the left of Labour economically, because the Labour Party has moved so horrifically to the right, to the point where, when polled, of all of the parties that were polled individually, so of the four major parties, which is the Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, Reform and Labour, the Labour Party voters were the most likely to support this move. Now, none of the parties had a majority, but 30% of the Labour Party, the supposedly Social Democratic Party, supported this move, whereas less than a fifth of Reform voters did, which just tells you how horrifically right-wing the Labour Party has gone. It really is, because the Reform voters, I imagine, a lot of them are annoyed more about the Czech bit than the billionaire bit. But the fact that so many Labour Party voters aren't annoyed by either one of those things is really quite worrying.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think people on the right, maybe Reform voters, are more angry at the foreign side of it. But it's an opportunity for the left to then say, this is why we need to protect our own institutions, and you can do that by bringing it into public ownership. And I imagine that's the exact pitch that Farage will do going forward. And the decisions Labour are making, it's like they are asking to be kicked out of government. It's really insane. Look, Labour are then the reason why is they're wedded to this privatisation agenda, just like the Tories.
Yeah, they're neoliberals.
But it never improves the services. I mean, do you think this is about trying to offload costs from the Treasury, since the government won't have to fully fund the Royal Mail because it's covered by private capital? Or do you think it's something else?
It's ideological. They're just the Tory party with not berets. That's not the word I'm talking for at all. Rosette is the word I'm looking for. It was a French sounding word. I knew I was going to get there eventually. Anyway, Yeah, so they're basically just red Tories. Um, he doesn't want to bring it into public ownership because he's not fundamentally a socialist, and that party has
Yeah.
been taken over by the right wing of that party, which is basically just soft Tories. They're basically Tories who liked Brexit or opposed Brexit. That's all they are, you know. Um, they're not going to bring it back into public ownership because that would be a good example. And I would ask any supporter of privatization, name me a single privatization that has worked. Look at the biggest problems in Britain right now. The postal service is rubbish, privatized. The bits of the NHS that don't work have been privatized.
I mean, I suppose their answer is always, well, it was rubbish back then, which isn't a retort because the question is, has privatization worked?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can't give an example because it doesn't, but they'll usually say, well, when it was nationalized, it was terrible.
You can argue that it's much worse. Look at, for instance, the water. Before it was privatized, we were building infrastructure. Now there hasn't been a dam created since 1993, just before, or sorry, slightly after privatization, and we've now got our seas literally polluted with effluent, literal human waste, so to the point where you can't go swimming on the seas anymore. You can't go into the rivers anymore because they're literally filled with actual shit. We are in a sea of shit because of privatization. And they still won't nationalize it because this is not to do with the public good. It's not to do with the public purse. It's not to do with quality of life. It's to do with the fact that our political institutions have been bought and paid for by billionaires.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.